Morning. I have a premise this morning, and it's that disappointments lead or can lead to hopelessness. Do you agree with that? Disappointments can cause hopelessness. And at the same time, when something is fulfilled, it can cause and it leads to trust. So that's a premise for today's message as we continue exploring Jesus as our prophet. So how many of you are totally certain that either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump is the right leader for the country and the world? You know, more and more people continue to use this saying here in other countries, the lesser of two evils. Have you heard that one? You know, it's a way to express the disappointment. You know, we can't trust. We're hopeless when it comes to politics. And what about sports? How certain, are you, or how hopeful are you that your team is going to win something in this season? Let's say the Broncos. Or let's say, the Cowboys, since David's here today. Or the Nuggets. Well, the Nuggets, you might say, okay, it feels like a little bit more hope there, right? Because they fulfilled something recently. What about the Rockies? What about the Rapids? Some of you might say, like, what is that? In case you didn't know, Rapids is the soccer team from Denver. So you see, it proves, these little, things in our daily life prove that disappointments can lead to hopelessness. And at the same time, fulfillment is something that can lead to hope and certainty. So what causes disappointments? Why do we continue in our lives to experience this sensation of being disappointed? Why so often, when it comes to our faith, believers find themselves struggling to trust Jesus? And I'm going to start with this beautiful story today from the Gospel of Luke. And it goes, when you see the whole story, you see that the people in the story, they go from hopelessness to hope, back to hopelessness, and back to hope. Why is that? So I'm going to read this story and try to identify why these people, which they somehow are a reflection or somehow a type of who we are. So we're not that different. So it's Luke 24 at the end of the book, the last chapter. Verse 13, it says, now that same day, which day? So keep reading and you will figure it out. That same day, two of them who? So let's keep reading. We're going to a village called Emmaus. I think that's how you say it. It's about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other, the two of them, about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked alongside with them. But they were kept from recognizing him, Jesus. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? What things? He asked. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we have hope that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. So that answers the verse 13. They said on the same day. So that's the resurrection day. So that same day, these two disciples were walking outside of Jerusalem, downcast, and Jesus came to them and started having this conversation. Verse 22, in addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they have seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see Jesus. Jesus said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Story continues, and they finally realized it's Jesus. So this happened the same day that Jesus resurrected, right? So as everyone back then was trying to figure out, to understand what just had happened, that was the context of that. That's when they were experiencing it. Because it was supposed to be a celebration week. It was supposed to be a celebration. As every year, we know this, the Jewish people will gather around the same week to celebrate Passover. Passover is the celebration, the day that they commemorate since Moses, 1,400 years before Jesus. Since then, they celebrated every year around the same season that we celebrate or Easter. They would go to Jerusalem to celebrate the salvation from Egypt. So it was packed with people. It was a huge thing that was happening back then, and it was supposed to be a celebration. But all of a sudden, in less than 24 hours, this celebration went from being such a beautiful thing to a sentence, went to a death row, it went to crucifixion, and it went to burial. 24 hours, all that. Imagine that, a birthday party, an anniversary of something. And all of a sudden, it goes from taking someone to court, sentence, death row, crucifixion, burial. 24 hours, boom, done. That's why the disciples reacted the way they did. Because it was sudden. It was in the middle of something beautiful. The night before, they just had a beautiful meal with Jesus. And then these two guys are here walking, disappointed, confused, and hopeless about the events of Jesus' crucifixion. So, and not just them. People, a lot of people, I can tell everybody, but I would say most of the Israelites back then were confused because many of them, and this is important detail about this message today, many of them had reached that point of faith where they had started to think of Jesus as the long-awaited Savior of Israel. So think of that. They were waiting for salvation. The Israelites had hoped that God one day was going to send the Messiah because he had promised it all over the Old Testament. And they were able to see in Jesus some of that. They thought of Jesus, it looks like it. It acts like it. It talks like it. And then when they saw Jesus at the cross, never mind. Let's go to the next one. Let's try this one out. It was a good, right, what he said? Prophet, mighty in word and in works indeed, but he was not supposed to die. So, sorry, Jesus, but Palm Sunday, we need to take that back. We need a refund from Palm Sunday because the palms were kind of expensive. We celebrated you as David's son, the next king of Israel, but it was a disappointment. So the context of that story is disappointment. And it's the context of many of us as we continue to grow in our faith with Jesus and to go through this life that is just full of bad news. So why was it shocking then? It was not expected. But why wasn't expected? Why Jesus' death was not expected if it was written? So what happened? When did the conversation got broken or distorted? Because they were confused because it was not expected. And why was not this expected? Because even though they welcomed Jesus' life and ministry, they didn't welcome the entire message that Jesus came to give. That is the problem there. And it sounds, I believe, sounds familiar to us today. Why do we struggle to have faith and trust Jesus? Because many times the way Jesus acts and does things is not expected. And it's very familiar to what we do today. Back then, they had the same virus, let's put it like this, spiritual virus. I call it a custom-made truth, and therefore a custom-made faith, and therefore a distorted view of who Jesus is. Again, they expected Jesus, the Son of God. They expected Jesus, the Son of God. Even Mary, his own mom, which I think, reading through the Gospels, was probably the only person, and I also would say Simeon at the beginning of the temple when Jesus was presented, that understood that Jesus had to die. Everybody else thought of Jesus as a king with a sword and a white horse. So Jesus' death was not expected. So they wanted a Messiah that was custom made according to their own criteria, their own definition of what a Messiah was supposed to be doing. They received everything else, especially the miracles. Who doesn't like a free healing, a free gift card, free tickets to a concert? Who doesn't enjoy the good stuff, the sensation of being healed? Because I know that Jesus loves me somehow. I don't know what's that a big deal for all of us. But at the end, deep down, we all are the same. We want a custom-made truth that will fit our own understanding of how Jesus should lead or should be to us. In this story, if you notice that Jesus pointed out that the issue was about believing what the prophets have spoken. In verse 25 and 26, let's read it again and listen to these words, okay? Imagine you in the middle of pain because you're struggling to understand their crucifixion, and Jesus said, "You're a fool. You're slow to believe. Imagine Jesus telling you those words. You're slow. Because all the prophets, in this context, the prophets, like in other parts of the gospel, you will find the law and the prophets, or the prophets, or the law. All those three ways of saying the law and the prophets, they refer to the same thing, the Old Testament. In this case, he's saying the entire scripture has spoken about this, and you didn't accept it. That's why it hurts. That's why it hurts. Because it was written all over. And you custom-made an idea of a Messiah that is not fitting your preferences. They didn't want a humble king and a little donkey. They wanted a king with buttons, with nuclear weapons. And Jesus said, that's not the freedom that I'm coming to bring. That's why it was shocking. There are about at least 50, that's a lot, 50 direct prophecies about the Messiah that Jesus fulfilled. And we're talking about people that grew up reading the scriptures. They were familiar with the scripture. I don't know what they did with Isaiah 53, Isaiah 61, Genesis 3:15. What did they do with all those scriptures? That is clear that somehow there was something that was going to happen painful to the Son of God. Genesis 3:15 is the proto-gospel, let's call it like this, and God is declaring the discipline, the punishment to Adam, Eve, and the serpent. And he said that the serpent was going to hurt the child of the woman. Isaiah 53, you probably have heard of it. It describes the painful suffering of the Son of God as he had to face death for salvation of people. So Jesus is really amazed, in shock, that he's saying, you had it all over in front of you, and then you are disappointed because I didn't came down from the cross, and you're struggling to understand who I was. So remember the premise. Disappointment leads to hopelessness. And that's what they were going through. But why is disappointment? Why do we experience disappointment? Most of the time, wrong expectations. People will disappoint you, or you will feel disappointed by people because you put some expectations that you didn't have control of. And that's what it hurts. There are also about more than, some scholars said that are about almost 600. I was being conservative about this number. More than 300 allusions or indirect references to the Messiah that Jesus also fulfilled. So what Jesus is saying here is something like, you feel disappointed because you failed to believe what it was written about me. The script didn't match the personal preferences of how the story was supposed to unfold. God had a script. God had a plan. And the plan didn't match. The plan didn't match the personal preferences, how salvation was supposed to happen. And that caused disappointment. So our question through how this series is, who is Jesus? What is the original script? In what ways are we like the two disciples? Are the Jesus of the Bible and my idea of Jesus aligned? Who is Jesus? Because if you have a distorted view of Jesus, you will continue struggle in your faith. One thing that was very truth in the conversation between Jesus and the two disciples was that affirmation that Jesus was a prophet, powerful in word and in deed. That was such a beautiful description of Jesus. Why did they say he was a prophet? Why didn't they say, hey, he was a bartender or he was a really nice guy? Why they went to a prophet? Within the expectation of the Messiah, one of the key offices that he was going to fulfill was the office or the role of the prophet. In other words, the Messiah had to be a prophet. What was a prophet? And we defined this last week, but I'm going to explain a little bit. Was someone sent by God with his message and authority to declare whatever God had to say to his people in certain times in history. Sometimes that message was encouraging, was of hope, and sometimes it was even of judgment. And those who brought a hard message to the people of Israel ended up like Jesus, dead. Because people didn't want to hear the message that God has sent to them because it was too hard. They wanted a custom-made prophet in the Old Testament. The same thing they did with Jesus. Matthew 23 talks about it. And Jesus said that in the same way they crucified, they rejected. Matthew 5:13, I believe, also talks about it in one of the Beatitudes. Blessed are you when you're persecuted because of me, because they also persecuted the prophets that came before me. So the persecution was a reality of the prophets, and people didn't want to accept that. And this is where we connect. Remember last week, the myrrh, that oil, symbol of death, symbol of burial. That is when we get the idea of a prophet from the three gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus. So they got that right. They recognized that the Messiah had to be a prophet. And what were the distinctions of a regular teacher of the law and a prophet? Why is that different? Because they had teachers of the law, and then they have prophets. What's the difference? Why was that unique? Jesus came, or a prophet in general, the idea of the prophet in the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled in him was to bring the message of God. And he said it in Luke 4, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has sent me to proclaim the good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom to the captive, to give sight to the blind. And then the idea of a prophet, the key idea of a prophet was that of a messenger of God with a special, unique message. But also, special prophets had this another characteristic. They were mighty. They had power. They performed miracles and signs. So, if you have the opportunity to pick, which of the two will you pick? Jesus, the powerful teacher, like these people say, oh, he's a powerful teacher, or Jesus, the miracle maker? Which one would you pick? Honestly, we all will go to the miracle maker. Who would actually say, I want Jesus, the powerful teacher? Who needs to be taught anyway? We went to school, college. Who needs more education? Nobody likes to be taught. this church will be packed if I would be a healer, right? If there were miracles. And people will come for miracles. Healthy churches will always struggle with the idea of the teaching. Because healthy churches must preach an honest word. So which one will you pick? The mighty teacher or the prophet indeed? The one who can solve all your issues. Health, relationships, demons, financials, I don't know. Storm. Here's the thing. Biblically, someone could be a prophet without the signs and the miracles. That is the definition of a prophet. There were prophets that did not do any signs, any miracles. Isaiah, Jeremiah, they didn't perform things like Jesus did. However, there could not be a prophet without teaching. So the essential definition of a prophet is that of a messenger, of a teacher of God. It's about the message. It's about the message. And that's what got Jesus in trouble, because his message was hard to those who did not want Jesus as he gave himself. The miracles and signs that we see in the Bible happen to validate special time of God's intervention in the history of his people. The miracles that we see in the Bible happened because God considered it necessary to validate his messengers. There are 3 clusters of miracles in the Bible: Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. And that's why when we see the big deal about Moses and Elijah in the gospel, because the emphasis is he is a prophet like Moses and like Elijah. So there are 3 clusters of miracles in the Bible. And this is a very important observation as we read the Gospels, because the miracles are not there only because Jesus had compassion of the sick, because Jesus thought of the disciples sinking in the lake, and he said, I need to save them. Everything that Jesus did, every miracle, every sign, every healing has to be read within the framework of his prophetic ministry. They all are connected as a big picture, a big puzzle. So the miracles in itself are full of compassion, full of honesty, full of a graceful heart from Jesus, empathy for the pain of people. But they were intentional to narrate, to communicate his identity as the Son of God and as the Messiah. That's why when we read the Gospels, we can't just say, oh, he heals sick, or he's supposed to heal me now. That's why we get confused. Why doesn't Jesus heal now? He does. I do believe he still does, especially when there is more persecution. The Holy Spirit reveals himself even in greater ways than he does right now in our country. And that's the story. Always when God saw the need of a breakthrough through miracles was because he was breaking through a new area that did not know about him. There was something new, something special needed to happen in order to validate his identity, his hand over things. Could have Moses take out the Israelites from Egypt without signs? I would say yes. Why do we have Elijah there? He didn't even write a book. And he's there. God was initiating moments, special moments in the history of Israel. And the miracles are there to validate the messenger. So when these two guys saw Jesus and they said, hey, this Jesus was a prophet, mighty teacher indeed, they are comparing the characteristic of a prophet, but he failed to be the Messiah because he did not come with power as a military king. He came with a different kind of power. We need to go beyond the immediate result of someone being healed, being fed, or a storm being calm. Miracles in the Bible are part of a bigger message. Like I said, part of a puzzle. They validate the prophet. Jesus performed miracles as part of his message. The miracles were part of the message. The message was that he was Son of God, the Messiah. In Matthew 11, we see this interesting conversation by someone who was supposed to know who Jesus was, but he was also a little bit struggling or trying to finalize an understanding. Matthew 11, 2-5 said this: when John the Baptist was in prison, and he heard about the deeds of the Messiah. See it again, the deeds of the Messiah. He sent his disciples to ask him, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? Jesus replied, no, yes. He didn't reply that, right? He could have said yes or no. What did Jesus say? Go back and report to John what you hear and see. What is that? Says here, beautiful. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Jesus is saying, I'm doing all those things so you understand that I am the Messiah. It's not for the sake of showing compassion, for the sake of feeling pity on people. He did. But that was done within the framework of his identity of the Messiah. That's why Jesus' prophetic ministry is so important for us. Because if you don't understand why Jesus does something or doesn't do something for you, you will continue struggle to understand who Jesus is. It will be painful. It will be a spiritual life that is painful. Jesus is not for me. If he was God, he wouldn't do this. He would do this. And we try to define God. And Jesus is saying, all the miracles that you see are there because I am the Son of God, and that's my message. In Matthew 8, we see another summary of why miracles. Matthew 8, 16-17 says, when evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with the word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. Jesus, as prophet, fulfilled the Old Testament, and much of his fulfillment is about his work as a teacher. The miracles are part of his message. As an application for us, as we continue to be a prophetic voice in this community, as we individually continue to live a prophetic life among those who are around our lives, and specifically here to our church, as we try to imitate Jesus' mission statement, I came to proclaim good news to the poor. And as we continue to serve this community, we need to be wise about how we love and show compassion. Compassion has to be part of a bigger message in the same way how Jesus did it. Compassion can be random and popcorn style. If Jesus If Jesus did miracles and signs and help and heal the poor as part of his message to proclaim the good news of salvation, we should also practice compassion with intentionality. So, Christian compassion is not about filling in a gap or a need. It's about helping people to find in Jesus their hope and to see their own need of salvation. Some of you won't like this, but I felt in my heart that I needed to say it. I love the fact that we have a food bank. I do love it. However, I have wondered, I have thought, if at some point we need and we're supposed to challenge people like Jesus did. How did Jesus challenge people as he opened his food bank? Did you know Jesus had a food bank? It's in John 6. And this message about the miracles of Jesus and understanding the role in the whole narrative is challenging to me. As I continue to lead this church and finding ways to serve the community towards Jesus, not because we need programs that look compassionate, but what is the message there? As I continue to try to serve people in Colombia, and here is where I get this idea that have got me wondering about if at some point we're supposed to challenge people like Jesus did. How did Jesus challenge people at his food bank? In John 6, 25, 27. The context, let's pause it there, honey, for a little bit. When I say honey, it's my daughter. Don't think that that's some random person over there is my daughter. So, the context of this, Jesus opened the food bank and he provided food for 5,000 people. I mean, men, probably more, like 15,000 people. And everyone got fed. The disciples got boxes that they took home. and then people were waiting. Next Friday, food bank, they were waiting, and Jesus disappeared. Jesus crossed the lake, and nobody knew where he was. And then people were like, where is Jesus? They were tracking him on My Find app. They couldn't find Jesus. They get in the boat. They crossed the lake, and they found Jesus. Hey, here you are. Here you are. Okay, food bank. And Jesus said this. Verse 25. Okay, let's read this. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when do you get here? When do you get here? And they said, Jesus answered, very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Let's pause there. When he said, because you saw the signs, not because you saw the sign, he said, not because you understood what this was about. That's what he said. You didn't see spiritually what was happening here. They were just seeing the feast, the barbecue, fish and bread for everyone. And Jesus saying, you're here not because you understood why I did that, but because you how you feel. Then he said, verse 27, do we have that there? Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which is the Son of Man, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Jesus cares. If we are hungry, if we're sick, he cares for our body. He does care because he made us. But he cares deeper for our eternity. And this is where we need to understand what the role of the miracles of the prophets are. They are pointing to the Messiah. And who is Jesus to you? That's a question that we continue to drive. Jesus is still a challenge for many, as it was for the first disciples. We started our conversation with a premise and a question. Disappointments lead to hopelessness, And the question is, what caused such disappointments? Why so often believers find themselves struggling to trust Jesus? Jesus came to fulfill his plan, not ours. That is why Jesus disappoints. Because he's not here to fulfill our plans. His plan is to save us from the power of sin. He came to give real meaning, real purpose, real life. And as with the first disciples, Jesus will continue to disappoint us as long as we continue to have a wrong expectation of who he is. He will continue to disappoint you. You will continue struggling to put your faith, to surrender to him if you have a wrong expectation of who Jesus is supposed to be to you. We live in a culture where we have filters for everything. We go online to book a hotel and we filter everything. We filter Airbnb, we filter pictures on our phones, we filter conversations, like I don't talk about that with these kind of people. Like, we are immersed in a culture that makes us believe that we can customize our faith. We can filter our faith, our truth. Like if faith was a car that you can customize. We hear that saying, you customize your experience when buying things, And somehow, the sad news of the church in America is that we have customized Jesus as well. We don't want his whole truth. We want the truth that aligns with our preferences, and this is why Jesus disappoints. We don't want Jesus the prophet. We want Jesus the miracle maker, and then we'll come back again when we need another miracle. The reality is that Jesus gives a miracle to all of us every day. You opened your eyes today. That's a miracle. You ate. You have a job. You can see, you can touch, you can love. You have life. You have salvation. What other sign do we need from Jesus to put our entire trust in him? Christians should always continue to pursue clear understanding of who he is. We should never assume that we are done knowing Jesus. That's arrogancy. His words are the truth, and we need to embrace them as such. We need to take advantage of hard times and moments of frustrations, disappointments, and pain, because it's in those moments when Jesus will walk alongside us to reveal deeper understanding of who he is. Do not resist struggles in life. These two guys at the beginning of the story, they were struggling, but they were open to the conversation. Do not resist the struggles, because it's in the struggle, it's in the pain, it's in the when the things are going south, that you are able to get a deeper understanding of who Jesus is. How did those two guys end up? They were just like astonished when Jesus said, "It's me." Jesus was able to, he revealed himself to them, and they were able to see Jesus at the table as they were eating together. In the conversations, that's the end of the conversation. Do not resist struggles. Do not resist the pain. Jesus will walk alongside you there. I need the teacher, and I need the miracle maker. However, I am so grateful for the miracles that it will be very pretentious from me to ask Jesus and demand for Jesus more and more signs for me to put my hope in him. I realize that I need his teachings more than anything else. I need a greater understanding of His Word, His parables, His stories, His saying, His voice. And I have repented this week. I repented because I hadn't realized that I was really missing that longing for Jesus' teaching. I mean, honestly, you go to Bible college, you go to seminary, you feel like, oh, I think I have a good understanding of who Jesus is. And Jesus said, that's arrogancy. You're never done learning of who I am. Look at the stars. Count them for me. Like that's, and I created them, so I'm bigger than all of them. The knowledge of Jesus is like an ocean deeper that we never stop learning. So Jesus the prophet is an invitation to invite Jesus to walk alongside our confusion, our doubts, our disappointments, and trust His word. Amen.